Hi, everyone. Welcome to Nectara's Trauma and Psychedelics live Q&A with Sasha Cuff. I'm Pascal Tremblay. I'm the co-founder of Nectara, and have a seat, get comfortable. We'll be together for 60, 90 minutes. Sasha, do you want to give a quick introduction as to who you are and what you're up to in the world?
Sure, yeah. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see this many people interested in my favorite topic in the world. I started in the healing arts about, well, it's almost 30 years ago now. In the beginning, I was more working with energy medicines and, channeling people's spirit guides and things like that. But as I went along, I was always searching. I was really surprised, actually, that Western medicine didn't understand so much of where disease and mental health was coming from. Quite shocked that, in my practice, of course, every day, the main two things people are showing up with are depression and anxiety. And, there was no real explanation for where these things go. Maybe it's, genetic or so really kind of dissatisfied with kind of what we know about mental health. I was quite shocked that, okay, well, this treats the symptom a little bit, but so I kept sitting with people year after year after year, trying to what is this? What, depending, once I started doing the trauma resolution work, things started to make sense, especially understanding developmental and attachment wounding and attachment trauma. And then having 3 kids myself during that time and practicing attachment parenting and noticing all of the correlations between actually mental health and biology and what happened in the early years and how you were raised and how healing on a deep level as I went along and, tried all kinds of different modalities and spiritual paths. And, I had a real seeker in me. And it feels like in the last few years, it's all starting to come together and coalesce into something that I can now actually transmit or teach to other people. And I've had enough practice. A lot of the techniques that I teach just came out of my practice. They don't actually exist in any other schools or textbooks or out in the literature. So my path has been I did take a bit of psychology in university, but I could tell it wasn't really giving me the tools that I was looking for because what I'm really focused on with healing is resolution, not just making someone feel better in a short term, but actually getting down into the core of what's going on and resolving it. So my life as a parent and just my own life of initiation and going through cancer and different things, and then finding the plant medicines and incorporating those into the practice with the trauma resolution. And so I'm just at the stage where I'm really excited it feels like I've been mining for gold, and every couple of years I'd find a nugget and throw it in the bag, and now I've got this bag of gold nuggets that I want to share because it's really working for people. People are getting really good results because we've actually got to the place where we're understanding the root of the dis-ease or the mental health issue, or and not just trying to fix it on this sort of surface level. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Pascal, and thanks for having me.
So what I've known from you in your practice for I've known you for 3-4 years now, is that you mentioned you've been doing this for 25, 30 years, developing your practice, developing your knowledge, understanding trauma from different facets. And you've taken some of the, most challenging cases around, and you've taken hundreds of people and helped them with their work. And it wasn't always the case that, when you started out that, there wasn't as much trauma information out there. There wasn't as much availability of plant medicine and psychedelics. How was it for you early on in your career, and how did you develop the practice you have today? And it's not to say you've solved everything, because there's still a lot more to learn, but
Yeah, of
Like,
course.
how was
Yeah.
the journey for you to get here? Like, I feel like you're a bit of a trailblazer in that sense of having done the work on the ground for so many years. And I also want to honor you for that as well. Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks. Um, it wasn't, you like you said, it wasn't always easy, because I was naive in a lot of ways. I would take on people with complex PTSD and personality disorders, and people that other therapists wouldn't go near because it's so difficult.
Mhm.
And I didn't always go well. But some of the hardest people I've worked with taught me more than anyone else, because they're such in like the core survival, kind of haywire, like their attachment needs. And um so there, yeah, it hasn't been an easy path, that's for sure. It's been going through it, making mistakes and learning and trying to do better. And yeah, for sure, it's
Mhm.
it's it kind of makes me laugh, dude. And life just initiating, with kids and marriages breaking up and diseases and health issues and all the things. And partly I've been really lucky, to have a supportive community. We started a men's group about 15 years ago in Caslow, and that was super informative. Kind of crowdsourcing, what's healthy masculine, what's a good dad, what's a good,
Mhm.
because the role models out there, the corrupt politicians and greedy businessmen and hockey players, never quite did it for me. So um, that was really helpful. And then in the early days, I started to hear my spirit guides and spirit team. So they've actually probably taught me more than anything
Mhm.
around what's at the root of different ailments.
Mhm. And for those who are new to this field, like, can you explain just briefly what somatic therapy is?
Yeah, so somatic therapy is, basically, it's a guided mindfulness practice. Uh, the purpose of which is to resolve trauma.
Mhm.
So an example would be, someone's telling you like, "Oh, my mom died when I was 5," and the therapist might be, "Okay, well, let's slow that down. What do you notice in your body when you say that?" "Oh, I get all tight and I get kind of scared and nervous." And as the somatic practitioner, there's all kinds of ways of supporting people to sequence that energy out of their body. Somatic therapy, kind of the principle of it, or Peter Levine actually 25 years ago figured out that a huge part of mental health and actually physical health, um, the reason that we're so sick is because, well, the main reason would be that, because of developmental trauma, we have all these people whose nervous systems haven't developed um, the way nature designed it to go. And a lot of that has to do with Western medicine and, telling people not to co-sleep and the cry it out method, and um,
Mhm.
feeding schedules for babies, and just the, obstetrics, which literally means to obstruct, and then birth trauma. So there's been a lot of sort of interference in the natural development of a human. So
Mhm.
somatic therapy is trying to bring back those elements that got missed. So one of them would be co-regulating. So if someone's dysregulated, they're outside of their window of tolerance in their nervous system. As the therapist, you would come in, and once you've established safe touch, help them to regulate. So you're, "Okay, yeah, it's really scary. I can feel that, but I'm right here with you. We got this." And I'm actually using my system to, slowly bring them out of a panic attack, or
Mhm.
big fear, or terror. Uh, and this is really important for psychedelic work, even if you're a sitter, because that's when things go sideways and you end up with ambulances and police cars and all that, is when you don't know how to regulate somebody. So somatic therapy is super important with psychedelics, and it's basically a set of techniques to help people resolve that. And what Peter Levine figured out was it's survival energy, right? So the
Mhm.
fight or freeze. So say you're in a fight and somebody holds you and you can't complete the fight, and then you don't have a solid nervous system because of the developmental trauma, which is most people in North America with cribs and car seats and strollers. Then, like in nature, an animal would just, after the threat's gone, shake it out, right? Like all that nervous fight and flight comes out. But for us, it actually blows a circuit and we go into usually a freeze response. So it's mainly working with the stuck, unprocessed fight, flight, and freeze that tend to get stuck in our nervous system and then cause
Mhm.
all kinds of chronic issues like depression and anxiety and whatnot.
Mhm. And before we open up for Q&A from people, where does psychedelics fall into that somatic therapy field? And at what point in your journey did you discover like what it can do, and what does it help people address and support you as a therapist when they, and in which medicines do you work with when you're working in therapy?
Right. Yeah. So what I've been noticing, I started working with the plant medicine or with medicines with other people about 7 years ago. And each medicine has very specific, kind of range of application that it's really good at. Ayahuasca is amazing for all kinds of things, but not for others. And the main medicines I work with are 3-MMC, which is an empathogen, very similar to MDMA. And then I also have a friend that we do ayahuasca circles together, and she pours the medicine, and I help with preparation, and then help during the ceremony, and help integration for usually a day and a half of deep group somatic integration after each ceremony.
Mhm.
And a lot of it depends on how it's held. In the psychedelic field these days, there's a lot of emphasis on the medicine as being sort of the main event. And so I have quite a different practice from most people. Like a lot of people, it's you take a medicine, you put on eye shades, and you put on your headphones and have a good playlist, and the support person's just there to like take you to the bathroom and kind of help as you're coming out of it and stuff.
Mhm.
For me, I don't use eye shades or headphones hardly ever. It's more relational. There's a whole field that we would call relational healing that's just starting to be understood. And that's where in the last couple of years, I've really put a lot of focus, because what I'm finding in my practice is that I would say about 1/3 of our wounding and trauma is relational, either attachment wounding or attachment trauma. And even a lack of relational intelligence can cause us, it's like to be kind of underdeveloped and stunted relationally. It's not a big, like communication classes should be taught in kindergarten, and there's not a lot of relational intelligence out there. And you can kind of tell someone that's relationally solid because they're warm, and they can connect easily, and all the social anxiety and stuff that people have, that's a big issue. So if you're just taking ayahuasca in the dark by yourself, there's no relational healing going on. It's just a plant, and you can work on all kinds of other things. But so in the ayahuasca ceremonies, we actually establish safe touch before we drink any medicine, so that when people are in the dark, scared and alone, we actually have about 15 people, we'll have 7 angels that actually come and hold people, and again help them regulate while they're, because a lot of people in the West, we tend to in ayahuasca go into our infant trauma or developmental trauma, and if we don't get held, then it repeats, and it actually makes it's like I'm alone in the dark and scared and no one's coming,
Mhm.
which is a repeat of the developmental trauma. So one thing I really advocate, if you are holding ayahuasca circles, if you can navigate safe touch ahead of time, I would say it pretty much doubles the potential healing of that medicine in those circles.
Mhm.
And then with the 3-MMC, it's very relational, like MDMA. It's a very relational medicine, so It's 8 hours long, and you're holding space for 8 hours, but you're talking, the other person's talking most of the time. So
Mhm.
you can make all these relational repairs, and that you couldn't make if they were just eye shades and headphones and
Right.
whatnot.
So for those who don't know, what's Stream MC? Like I've talked about it with people, and often they're like, what is that? Like, what, and can you tell us more? I know it's an empathogen, but and similar to MDMA, but can you tell us more about that medicine, and why did you choose that as kind of like your go-to medicine?
Sure. One thing I like, well, it exists naturally in a tree in Africa called the kat tree, or the chat tree, and you can go to coffee shops in Tanzania and chew on the bark of this tree, and get a buzz and get all talkative and relational. And but there's a infamous character in the psychedelic field named Dr. Z, who figured out how to synthesize 3-MMC and make it from other molecules. And what I like about it is, well, it has these attributes that MDMA doesn't. MDMA tends to be a little more kind of gushy in the heart chakra, like, I love you, like that kind of. 3-MMC doesn't, like, there's a gratitude and like, oh, I really appreciate you kind of feeling, but it's not as like gushy. It's more clear in the, like, third eye crown, and it
Yeah.
has this attribute that I call clear seeing. And in Buddhism, they have the clear seeing, where you just see things clearly, and it really enhances your ability to inquire, like somatic inquiry. Or so you can ask yourself a question, like, I've got this weird symptom, and like, where did it come from? And then look in, and it's like, you just know. It's like, oh my God, I'm seeing my grandmother and her sexual abuse, and then her terrorizing my mom, and you see the chain, and that's why I'm like this. And it's quite remarkable sometimes when that inner heal. It doesn't always happen, but often it's people's inner healer comes out, their intuition, their inner healer, we call it, and it can just like,
It's like an arrow of truth, right?
it's
That's
like
what
an
I
arrow
call
of
it.
truth, and it
Yeah.
just clears up, like, why am I telling myself that nonsense story? Like, obviously this is what's true. And
Mhm.
and so it's really helpful in therapy, because it can just like put you right on the track that you need to go for healing.
Yeah, and what's your role then as a therapist if the person is kind of using that arrow of truth to, see clearly and kind of be very clear on what's going on, what's happened, where they're going? Like, what's your role then as a therapist? And often you work with a co-therapist, right?
Yeah, most of the time I'll have a co-therapist who's usually an apprentice, like someone that's taken my course, and then they want to learn more. So we work to get, it's the co-therapy is a really beautiful way to teach, because you're actually doing it together. Um,
Mhm.
as a therapist, if someone is like their truth meter or their inner healer, we call it, if that's on, then we're just supporting, maybe taking notes, like, whoa, that was really profound what you just figured out there or said. And we try
Mhm.
not to get in the way if somebody's on a, if they're really nailing whatever they're seeing. Where I might step in is if they start going off into stories about it. I'll probably bring them back, like, okay, how's it feel inside when you're talking, when you see that it was your grandma and your this lineage thing. Oh, I got this tight thing in my gut. Okay, well, let's stay with that. Oh, I'm gonna puke, and and then you just help them, because I really found you can talk about your issues and your childhood wounding and whatever all day long. If you don't change the way your body's holding it, there's not a lot of transformation. You're more doing symptom management. The thoughts are, it's mostly the thoughts. Like, there's this big belief out there that like our thoughts create the body and reality. And if we have a negative thought, then it's creating shame. But it's actually, what I've seen is it's about 90% the other way around. We have old fear and old shame, and it gets triggered and cycles through our system. It's stuck in there, and then our mind makes up all these stories. Oh, it's because I'm not good enough, and I'm not lovable, and um, so
Mhm.
the implicit imprints actually create a lot of. So if you're dealing just with the thinking, it's basically doing symptom management. If you're, and that's where the medicine is also really helpful. 3-MMC, it increases interoception or interoception, which is that ability to sense and feel your inner world and your felt sense. And then if you can, and that's basically what we're doing in somatic therapy, is trying to get people into their felt sense. But of course, if there's a bunch of relational wounds, you can't even get to the body. So you got to work with those first and then get in there.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned around, and Kate has a question. She asked, how would you speak to clients around SSRIs and working with TMMC? Is there like things that you recommend there?
Yeah, definitely. They would have to come off their SSRIs, not because there's a contraindication, not because they're like something bad would happen, but basically the SSRIs fill the receptors and then the 3-MMC can't get in there. So it really mutes the effect of the medicine. So I usually tell people, and you have to look up, the half-life of whatever particular, because some of them stay in your body a lot longer, some are more short acting. If someone is really unstable and suicidal, I wouldn't recommend that they come off their SSRIs and take a medicine, because something bad can actually happen when they're coming off. So you want to be really careful about that, depending on how dependent they are and which SSRI. So I would really recommend researching which SSRI, how long it takes to clear your system. Usually it's about a week or two is the sort of average that I would say you need to be off for at least that many days before doing the medicine, just so that it'll work properly. And even then, we might give you a bit of a higher dose to start, just so it can get in there.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question, Kate. Our friend Kelly's asking, when you're new to facilitating psychedelic therapy, what are signs to watch for in pre-session that might get you in over your head during a medicine session? That's a great question.
Yeah. Well, definitely if someone's actively suicidal, that's going to be something you probably don't want to work with until they've stabilized in that. Because the medicines can be destabilizing, and that's one thing we really need to be aware of. That's what's, in a sense, good about them, is they can help us deconstruct and then reconstruct. But you want to be careful. If someone, like in my intake form, I always ask, what's your support network look like? Like, is your family, are you close to your family? Do you have a loving partner? But then, so if someone has no, say no friends or no family, the hard part is that they need the therapy the most, but they're also the most risky, because after the session, if they're feeling a bit discombobulated or a bit dissociated, or they're having a hard time, if they don't have anyone to support them, that's when things can get challenging. They can some people will turn on you, right? And personality disorders is definitely something I would stay away from with medicine work, unless you really, really know what you're doing. I wouldn't take that on, because people can they do what projection, right? So, and I've had this happen to me times where people project the perpetrator onto me because I'm a white male, whatever. And then, after the session, they make up a story like, oh, you gave me too much, we went too deep, too fast, there wasn't enough integration, and now I messed up and it's your fault. So what I've really done in the past few months actually is put a lot of work into my informed consent document. And one of the things I've added recently, which I sort of thought was obvious, but people, I guess, are coming into this fairly uninformed, it's because it's sort of spreading through the masses pretty quickly. That it's kind of like do at your own risk too. Like if you're going to take a psychedelic, I make it really clear that you can have a hard time afterwards. And that's the nature of it. It's not that something's gone wrong, or that something you took too much, or not. I mean, that can happen, of course, but by making it really clear to people, like, you're taking a medicine that can mess you up. Even if I hold it perfectly and have aftercare and everything and integration, you could still have a hard time, and that's normal. So if people can't deal with that, or they don't have enough support, or they're really desperate is another red flag. Yeah, I would work with somebody for a while with no medicine, and really get some time to assess if it's a good idea, before jumping into a medicine protocol.
What about things like high blood pressure or, cardiac issues or heart issues or anything like that? Like, are there any ones that are pretty strong, like, yeah, I'll think about it, or no's for you?
Yeah, the gauge that I use for that one is like, can you do moderate exercise? Like, can you walk 4 blocks without getting out of breath, or can you walk up the stairs without getting out of breath? Because I have, my dad did it, and he's got a heart arrhythmia, and but he's not in like congestive heart failure or something, like, because they are like MDMA and 3-MMC have this amphetamine moiety, the molecule, the base of the molecule is amphetamine, so it does increase heart rate,
Mhm.
and blood pressure. So but so does running. So if you can run or walk fast, then I've never seen a problem with that.
Mhm. Mhm. You mentioned earlier, like, the importance of touch in kind of the healing work. So can you tell us more about the role of touch in somatic therapy and your perspective on nurturing touch in the healing arts in general?
Yeah, thank you for that. I've kind of been geeking out on touch and having like sort of an epiphany recently. And of course, it's one of the trickiest things to navigate in therapy. A lot of schools of therapy would say, don't touch your clients and, stay out of trouble. Uh, but if you're working with early attachment wounds and developmental trauma, what was missing was nurturing. And if you look at other land mammals, all other land mammals co-sleep with their babies. They keep them really close until they're old enough to like walk on their own. And for some reason, humans have sort of lost some of that instinctual parenting, that we're these animal bodies, and the animal body needs the right inputs to develop optimally, especially the nervous system. So with developmental, like the cry it out method, and what often, or the parents have this idea that if you hold the kids to the baby, and that they're going to grow up to be dependent on you, and it's actually the opposite happens. If you don't hold them, then they're still in your basement when they're 30 or whatever. So in the healing, in somatic therapy, one of the main tenets is that you go into the imprint and then you do something different, or you provide what was missing. So in the case, there's an intervention I do all the time where the medicine's usually in the beginning when it's coming on strong. People will go into this sort of, like scared, alone, shame-filled infant. And then I'll get them like, just call out, ah! And then I'll come and I'll actually pick them up if I can. And then, it's like you're settling the baby. And there can be this nurturing touch where it's just like gentle touch and even gentle sounds like, oh yeah, I got you. And you're co-regulating, because a lot of times babies cry just because they need connection, not because they need food or other things. So the touch is key to resolving that developmental trauma.
Mhm.
And I kind of look at touch with there's nurturing touch, there's sensuality, and there's sexuality. And what I say this to people in the beginning of a session, there's 3, and in the session, we're going to focus on nurturing touch only. We're not going to get sensual or sexual because it's not appropriate for the container that we're in. And what I've been seeing is that as people like the cool thing, and again, 8-hour session, I just did a session yesterday with a guy where he would start dissociating, and then we would touch him and he would come back, and then he would dissociate and we'd touch him and we'd come back. And it was like he didn't get any touch or nurturing from birth. He had
Mhm.
so he just needed it like 1,000 times in the session, and it started to repair his attachment, like to actually be able to trust
Mhm.
humans. um and it's not talked about in many of the modalities, and most modalities keep it out, of course, because it's something you have to really navigate well and safely, and you don't want to touch too much, and you really got to let people have their boundary. There's a lot of nuance to providing nurturing touch in a safe way, and in the course that I'm teaching, we really go into that. But the cool thing about all that is that as the practitioner, you get to be like the loving mother, the loving father, like the elements that were missing was like nurturing and love and care, and take care of people, and they have this corrective experience of like, oh, that's how it was supposed to go, and it starts to actually rewire the attachment circuits in their brain and all of that. So yeah, nurturing touch is super important. And if you're in a relationship, you can give that to each other in a safe way, because you're in a, or, it's not a therapist client thing. So that's a really good place where, because imagine if you've never been touched and then you have sex for the first time, and all of this, you get some of it met, and all of a sudden you have those two things like totally, there's all these people chasing sex that actually just are like babies that want to be held or touched or nurtured or whatever. So you can provide that in a non-sexual way with each other, and it can actually lead, like, heal. You can actually heal each other a little bit every night for ongoingly.
Yeah, thank you. Like I had an experience with you in a group where for the first time I was held by 4 men surrounding me, and like I cried like a baby. It was very powerful for me because my dad never really did that for me. And I was one of the most transformed. Like just that hug by itself like helped me heal my relationship to men and the masculine in general. So I can speak like just from experience around the power of like nurturing touch and what it can do and transform. I can imagine for you as a therapist, like over 25 years of doing this kind of work, like that must have been sometimes a bit of a landmine field for you to navigate safe touch. And can you share more around the consent and kind of like the co-therapy model and how that kind of all comes together in an integrous way for you?
Yeah, I mean, the first 10 years I just didn't touch people. It was more just talking and suggesting remedies or muscle testing things, or it didn't dawn on me how important that was. And then people can have, I mean, it can be really tricky to navigate, because people can have what we call disorganized attachment, where their attachment system's like, I need touch, but if their caregivers were a threat, then their survival system is like, that's a threat. So they have these two parts going on at the same time, like, come closer, go, but not get away, but come close, but get away, like, touch me, don't touch me. And you want to, it's just you have to be super patient as a practitioner. The other thing, it can take a long time to navigate safe touch. Most people I've found within half an hour, but if they have a lot of boundary violations, like sexual abuse or physical abuse, then it can take multiple sessions or even years. I have one client who's was just horrendously sexually abused, and it took us 3 years to be able to like do this for like 1 second. And we're still this is about how far we've got with safe touch. So so it's not just an automatic thing, and you never want to override it, because sometimes people will I have techniques that I teach how to do this, but people are like, oh yeah, I love touch, and then you go to touch and their body's doing this, oh yeah. So you just really want to track, because sometimes the mind will override the alarm system. So yeah, there's all kinds of things to know about all that.
Yeah, thank you. Julia has a question: is what are complementary modalities you'd recommend for this relational trauma healing? I'm interested in breathwork facilitation and Hakomi therapy. I can speak to the breathwork piece. I just came back from a training, and just like how much trauma can surface from just the breathing aspect, and like how I feel personally that like all facilitators should have some form of trauma-informed training so that they can be more trauma aware and really help people navigate those experiences in a safe way. Can you Can you share more around what complementary modalities can be helpful with somatic therapy?
Yeah, Hakomi is really good. I've never actually taken some Hakomi, but I had a bunch of friends that and one of the helpers in one of my trainings had done a bunch of Hakomi stuff, because they actually into the attachment. They work a lot. They have some really cool attachment healing techniques and understanding.
Mhm.
What I find like body work is really good after a medicine session for integration to get people, into their bodies. For me, actually, probably the second biggest modality that I'm employing would be like shamanic techniques, because there's plant
Cool.
spirit medicine, working with tobacco and different things. Tobacco's like the jungle tobacco for clearing energy blocks and opening things up. And
Mhm.
then a lot of people have dissociation, and a lot of people aren't even aware that part of them dissociates. And another thing I call complexes, or Jung called them complexes, but he didn't get into the deeper understanding of them. Complexes are like it's like when the child can't deal with life is too hard. Part of the child will dissociate, and it'll pull in an archetypal energy, like the caregiver or the martyr or the slave or the servant or the
Mhm.
victim, or and what most people don't realize is that there's a dissociative component to that. So Jung called them feeling charged autonomously acting complexes, meaning they can be acting out. You could be up here going, don't do it, don't do it, don't say yes. And the complex will say yes. And then you'll be like, why the hell did I say yes? I don't have time for that. And you've got this caregiver or martyr complex that overrides your own needs. So in sessions, what I've been finding is that ketamine is actually super valuable for working with dissociation, because at low dose, I don't give high dose, but low dose ketamine can really help you track where the dissociative part goes. Oftentimes it's like up here or up on the ceiling, or it's into the spirit world, or it's into the void. And with a little bit of ketamine and some understanding of the spirit world one's self, sometimes the parts can go into hell, which feels like unbearable aloneness forever, or eternal torture, and that you never get. And they're kind of like states. But so shamanic techniques like soul retrieval, they would call it like a soul retrieval. Trauma happens, a part splits off, checks out. The shaman helps you get it back into this realm and into this body. So I found those techniques super helpful.
And is the ketamine in combination with CHMRMC? Julia's asking.
Yeah, so sometimes I do just ketamine sessions, but most often it'll be about 3/4 of the way through it's around hour 5 or so of a 3-MMC session, small dose of ketamine. And then usually the person's able to, like, I can still tell that I'm here, but I'm also somewhere else in this other dimension or whatever. And so, I'll guide them to find the part and then start bringing it back in.
Mhm.
And then the 3-MMC is useful because as the part comes back in, it's always landing in the reason that it left, which is like a trauma vortex or some, the intelligence of the body is like, there's trauma, it didn't get released, it's stuck there, it's vibrating, nervous fight and flight energy. And if you didn't dissociate from it, you'd have like chronic anxiety. Some people can't dissociate very well, and they have chronic anxiety. So when you bring the part back,
Mhm.
you're always being aware that you're going to have to probably do some trauma processing as it lands.
What's a low dose of ketamine for you? Cecilia's asking.
Well, that's complex because I use a different. Dr. Z gave me this special ketamine that's a little different, so I can't. I don't want to give anyone dosing because it could be totally different from the ketamine that they have. I do
Mhm.
it insufflated, so I have a little blower thing and I blow it up into people's sinuses. Some people do it injection, or you can have mist sprays, but yeah, just do a small amount of powder up their nose.
Yeah. Kelly's asking, what's the most impactful thing a therapist can bring to a session to promote the most safety and healing? It's a great question.
Yeah, the most impactful thing is your nervous system being stable and regulated, and if you're part of being a really good practitioner is this commitment to your own ongoing work, and especially with what I've been finding that is, I want to sing from the top of the mountain or whatever, is that when we're doing this early developmental trauma work and people are going into their scared infants and scared toddler and whatever, and we're regulating their system, like in order, like humans are born with this big head, and upright pelvis. So we're born very underdeveloped in our nervous system. It takes us a year to walk, whereas like horses and stuff can walk within a day of being born. So to compensate for that, there's this entrainment with the caregiver's nervous system. And when you're settling the baby, it's actually entraining to your system, and your system is teaching them how to do it by doing it together. If you're a parent, this is really helpful information, because then you can consciously entrain even more and consciously calm your own system, so that the baby learns, or the adult who didn't get enough of that can learn how to self-regulate. So you really want to take good care of yourself, do practices that strengthen your nervous system, that bring any dissociated parts of you back into embodiment. Is probably the more embodied you are, the more you're going to be able to help people in therapy.
What do you mean by embodied? Like how someone who's new to this work or is a budding therapist, like how can they work on their embodiment? Like, is it just walking their own healing journey, addressing their own traumas? Like, what else can you say about embodiment?
That's a huge part of it. What I described of getting any dissociated parts back into the body and integrated. Inner child work actually helps with embodiment, because sometimes the stress will cause the psyche to split, and you'll get different parts of you stuck at different ages. So you might have a 3-year-old that's really angry in there because it never got to have a temper tantrum because the parents would freak out. It got angry. So coming in as the loving adult and connecting with those inner child parts and giving them what got missed, like having a temper tantrum, or so that they're not split off anymore, and they reintegrate. When you do this work, if you do it well, after every session, one of the main symptoms of progress is that you feel more whole and more complete and more in this physical body, more and less in your head, and more like in the moment and more available for life, and in the senses too, like you're actually feeling what's going on right now in this second, rather than just thinking about the concepts that I'm talking about. So yoga is really good because it connects you. You're really building this bridge of the awareness and the body working together. And so yeah, any of those things can really increase your level of embodiment.
So for people that are working in the medicine, including the therapists, or doing their own work, like how can people determine what type of trauma they have if they have no memories of it? Like, what have you seen from your experience? Like, how do you work through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get asked that, well, quite a lot. It comes up in sessions and stuff where people are like, oh, it feels like I got this unprocessed stuff that's causing me pain or anxiety or fear or whatever, but I don't know where it came from. And there's multiple reasons for that. One is it could be something from your lineage. It could be something like that terrible that happened to your grandfather, and then that got sort of passed on to your dad, and now it's living in you. And they've actually, with epigenetics, they've actually done all these studies that show that that's an actual, something that happened to your grandfather will affect how your genes are expressing in this generation. And so ancestral, it can be coming from ancestral, which can be confusing because it's like there's no memory in your lifetime of where it's coming from. It can also be coming from anything under age 2. there's usually no conscious memory because the hippocampus doesn't come online until around age 2. So everything previous to that, there is memory, but it's implicit. It's not explicit. So explicit memory is like, oh, we went to the store and we went to the park. It's very sort of like linear. Implicit memory it's more like the body memory. Like the body records kind of the vibe of what's going on, and it also records things that feel good, and it records things that don't feel good. So it can be coming from something especially with it's probably the most common source of things of like, there's something wrong with me, but I can't figure out, and I've talked to a therapist for like 10 years and we can't seem to get at, what it is. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be you weren't held enough as an infant or a toddler, and it's coming from there, but you don't remember it. So, and then there's very occasionally there'll be like big past life traumas can have a bit of influence into this life, and but yeah, that's or the other main cause is sexual abuse that you've blocked. Like have a memory block around because when you're 4, it would not. It's so far out of the realm of what you know that you have no capacity to deal with it. So we tend to, that happened to me when I was 6. Like there was a few times it was really bad, and I didn't remember it till I was like 30. I started doing therapy, and then it surfaced. But yeah, I was like, why do I have this weird dark energy around sex? Like, where's this coming from? And then, well, there was, yeah. So there can be trauma there you just don't remember. That's another cause of it. The cool thing is the body remembers it. So it doesn't matter if you have the conscious memory or because by going into the felt sense and feeling, tension and holding patterns and resolving shame freezes and stuff, you can heal a whole traumatic event that you don't even remember, because it's, again, you're just releasing it. You're completing whatever got missed, getting it out of your nervous system.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Our friend Jillian. Hi, Jillian. What is the explanation for clients looping during and or after the session, and how to work with it? So how do you work with clients looping through things either during or after the session?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the session, as much as you can, you try to insert anywhere there's a little gap or a potential for something new. And it's really hard to work with because you pretty much have to be really intuitive to guess what might be the thing that's going to like shift them out of the loop. Getting them out into their body is helpful, like distracted from the mind, because a lot of the looping is mental, and they're just spinning in these sort of thought loops, in default mode. So saunas or jumping into hot and cold water or massage can be helpful, just to start getting that awareness coming down and in and away from just spinning in the head.
And the car buffer, to the legendary car buffer that you
Car buffer is, yes, thank you. Yeah. That's helpful. That's a good one.
For anyone out there that wants to spend the best $65 you ever spend, go get a car buffer at Canadian Tire and just buff yourself with it, like an orbital polisher. It's really awesome in session too, for like getting people out of those loops, and also just feels great and releases tension in the body. Doesn't replace a full-blown massage, but it feels great. And Jillian's asking a follow-up, which is why do they loop? Like, what usually goes on? It might be different for everyone, but in general, what's happening there?
I don't know, actually. I've wondered. That's one thing I haven't quite figured out yet. You see it in ayahuasca circles sometimes. People will just start repeating the same, it's like a 1 minute or 30-second loop, and and you can rub them, get them out, and sometimes they're just stuck in it for a while. it definitely has the feel of trauma, right? Because trauma often has a spin to it, and often we say like the trauma vortex. So it could be that my theory is that there's a like a bit of a trauma vortex in some thought pathway or some neural pathway that's just spinning and looping, and it could be like also a protection, like there's a deeper trauma underneath, and it's safer to loop in thought than to actually go into. I would imagine there's probably some terror underneath the looping. If you can kind of get them out of the loop and get them down into the body a bit more, my sense is there'd probably be a lot of disturbance underneath the looping, but it's easier to stay up here. And ADD and stuff like that, I think there's a connection with that potentially. So yeah, I don't know exactly, but those are my theories.
Yeah, in relation to that, like what are some of the most challenging situations that you can encounter during this work? And I would imagine with psychedelics being involved, like you can open up some pretty big Pandora's box during session. So I'd love for you to share like a couple of those situations, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sometimes when you're sometimes, like I was saying earlier, yeah, we learn the hard way. So sometimes the medicine can blow the lid off of something that's been, compressed for, like, I did a session for a woman who was in her 60s, but just had crazy childhood trauma and, almost just vibrating, just sitting there. And so I used MDMA instead of 3-MMC because 3-MMC is a little harder with it, actually dissolves the lid sometimes, whereas MDMA you have a bit more chance of getting it back on after, like, at the end. Anyways, this woman did MDMA and opened up a powder keg of trauma, and she basically screamed in terror for about 2 hours, which felt like forever. Like after 5 minutes of someone screaming in terror, you feel like, okay, it's going to end soon. And this feels like a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know if after an hour, it's like, okay, this is insane. But I just used every trick in the book, and I was rubbing her body, and we're co-regulating. We're getting to think good thoughts and think of your kids, and okay, we're gonna move. We're gonna, and she was kept popping in and out of dissociation, and we eventually got her back in her body, and the screaming subsided, and of course it changed her life. Like there's before that and after that is a totally different thing, but it was hard work. The other mistake I made once was when I was first working with friends with 5-MeO. We were smoking she smoked it, and then there was a tiny little bit of vapor just left in the pipe, and I thought, oh, I'll get into the vibe with, and I'll just take this little tiny bit, and then I was like gone out of, into the well, I had a cosmic experience. I was high-fiving with, the origin of the universe and being born and dying. I was like, yeah, we exist. This is the most amazing thing. Like yes to existence, like woohoo. And then I started coming out of it, and I was like, oh my God. And there was like blood on the walls. And I went from the most ecstatic moment of my life to the worst moment of my life in about 4 seconds. And I guess I had like kicked the pipe with my foot and cut my foot, and then I was flailing around and wiped blood on the walls. And luckily nobody, like, she was okay, but it was like getting spanked by the universe. Like, okay, dude, someone's got to have their feet on the ground. You don't do like,
You don't mess with the God molecule. It's called the God molecule for a reason. You don't.
Well, it showed the whole spectrum, like full God to like full human fuck up, shame, horror, like self-judgment.
Well, let's talk about this a little bit too. Like the 5-MeO world has like been like quite popular in the last you know, I don't know, a year or two, like a lot of practitioners are coming up. There's like some training is coming up. There's some beautiful resources. Like the 5MEO organization has a great website with lots of information. Like, can you tell us more about a little bit more about 5MEO and like the amount of respect that it takes for a practitioner and amount of education and training really that it takes to hold that medicine? Because I've experienced it and others have, and it's obviously very powerful. So can you tell us more about that and what are you seeing and what would you like to see in the space of the 5MEO world?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have like the utmost of respect for that medicine, and also uh, like a healthy amount of not fear, but caution around it. Yeah, like I don't think if I hadn't been practicing for 20 years already before psychedelics, I probably wouldn't be using that one yet. You know, in the Amazon, and when you're learning to use ayahuasca and stuff, it's like a 7-year apprenticeship before you even think of pouring medicine.
Mhm.
So 5-MeO, it's amazing. It's magical. It responds to intention better than anything I've ever seen, and it probably has the most potential for harm of any medicine that that people are using, that of the ones that we know of. And people are probably using weird molecules that can harm you too, but of the main sort of classical psychedelics and whatnot.
Mhm.
Uh, because I think what I've heard the most, and you hear it with LSD sometimes too, is like, okay, they did this medicine and then they never really came back. Is sort of the most common sort of thing that sticks with a person as a negative effect. And my take on that is that they dissociated and then they didn't fully come back into their body. So whoever was holding the space wasn't aware of the dissociation or how to do a proper soul retrieval or come out, bring someone out of dissociation. So I think a
Mhm.
lot of people that have like the after effects that are bad, it's because they've become more dissociated than before they started. Um, yeah, it's just one I would really just hold with a lot of respect and
Mhm.
reverence and caution, and really be solid in your practice before adding that in,
Yeah.
is how I would go about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wise words. Jillian was asking to go back to that lady who was screaming in terror for 2 hours. Like, what was the mistake or the opportunity for growth that you experienced then, and what would you have done differently if you could?
That's a good question.
Like, was it a
Like,
mistake or like what were you sharing because it
no,
was a
I know.
challenging?
I actually, yeah, that's the answer I was gonna say, is that that's kind of what needed to happen, it, because I think it had been suppressed for so long. It was like all these protectors, right? So we did try to do, I was like, okay, this woman feels like a bit of a powder keg. Uh, so we tried doing a bunch of like a bunch of sessions with no medicine to see if we could kind of like crack it and get little, you know, ideally with trauma, you want to kind of do it like chunk by chunk. You don't want it to explode, um,
Hmm.
because if someone's outside their window of tolerance, they're just looping in the old trauma. It's not actually resolving. So, um, but what I found with her, what I was hoping with MDMA was that we could kind of, you know, crack it and then do it, you know, like a pressure cooker. But it didn't go that way. And and I think that's the way it needed to go, the way her particular presentation with the protectors that she had and the physical holding, it was sort of like either I explode or I never get there. But that's unusual. Usually you can kind of like dip in and come out, or release it bit by bit. So I think it's what needed to happen. It was just
Hmm.
exhausting for me and the co-therapist.
Yeah. And can you speak a bit more about the difference between MDMA and GMMC? Like, what are the different use cases that you would decide one over the other?
Yeah, usually if someone's got complex PTSD, we'll start with MDMA first. Like I was saying, the 3-MMC, sometimes it feels like the lid is like dissolved. It's not, there's no lid to put back on. So it just keeps coming. So you can, with 3-MMC, if I started with that, people can have a really hard time in the aftermath, the 2 or 3 days following the session. If like I've really been working a lot on this idea of aftercare. If someone's quite fragile, we highly recommend aftercare. So that's like an apprentice that's coming in. So the co-therapy team leaves at like 6, and then the apprentice comes in, and there's a crossover of like half an hour, where like, okay, this is, and it's kind of like the parents going out and the babysitter coming in, because people can, especially with 3-MMC, and especially if you put that with when you do a soul retrieval, people can be kind of regressed for a day or two, where half of them feels like they're 3 years old or 2 years old, or so the aftercare can continue the healing, where they're still getting cared for and nurtured, especially if that got missed and the parents were just not parenting. It's a corrective experience. Oh, that's possible. Oh, maybe I am lovable and worthy of care and love. And so aftercare is really important. If you feel like somebody's really delicate, or they got a ton of trauma, or they don't have a strong nervous system, so they don't know how to self-regulate. Like I always test people's nervous system with the muscle testing, 0 to 10. Anyone under 3 can't self-regulate, because they've never learned, they haven't had enough co-regulation to actually learn how to do it physically. And that's where a lot of anxious attachment comes from, because it's like, I actually need you to regulate me, because I don't know how to do it. My biology didn't learn it. So they actually need the partner or whoever to, and if you know that, it's great. Oh, okay, you're feeling anxious, I'm here, co-regulate. And every time you do that, and then their nervous system starts getting stronger and stronger, and then they start moving towards secure attachment. But your question was about 3-MMC. The difference, I would give MDMA for people that feel like they have like more trauma to start. It's a little more heart-centered, and it's a little less like take the lid off and go with it. So that's the main difference of how I use them. I
Yeah.
probably use 3-MMC it's probably about 80 or 90% of my practice, and maybe 10% MDMA.
Sorry, my camera keeps shutting off.
Yeah.
What's a typical dose of 3-MMC that you can share?
So there's the client dose and there's the therapist dose. The client dose is anywhere from 200 to 600. So dosing is a little, because it's not just by body weight. It's also, if people have done tons of MDMA, it actually makes their tolerance to empathogens go up over time. So dosing is a little bit tricky, because if you give someone too much, it's like you get the bad effects of amphetamine, where they're kind of wired and they're just, but they're not going into their body as much. If you give them too little, then they're kind of like it doesn't have the same awesome effect of being able to help them get into their felt sense. So, and once you give them a dose, their tolerance goes way up right away. So it's hard to give a second dose to get to where you could have it from first dose. So it's a bit tricky. We usually give people like a booster. So the average dose for someone, I would say, is about 350, sort of the middle. And then an hour later, we give a booster of about 120. And that's just to extend the duration of the journey. It doesn't take people much deeper in. And then there's a lot of, I've worked a lot to really refine what we call therapist dose, which is about 80 milligrams usually, or less. So it's about a fifth of what the client would be taking. And that's partly to be in the same sort of energy with the person. And then also it's an empathogen, so it actually makes you more empathic. So it actually has a good teaching for the therapist of it. It kind of calms your mind, and it gives you the endurance to do, because it's an amphetamine, to do a 7-hour session or 8-hour session. So yeah, that's the dosing that I go by.
Yeah, and some people, they want to go through a deep journey, and some people are kind of wanting it to be a bit lighter as well. Like there's some inner intelligence around dosage that you take into account as well.
Exactly. How deep do you want to go? That's one of the questions I have now on my informed consent form is, do you want to do a deep dive or kind of dip your toe in, or kind of go mid-range, and that'll affect doses.
Can you explain more what you mean by taking the lid off? Like I'm imagining it's just a kind of an explosion of trauma release or expression, or
Yeah, it's where people don't have the capacity to stop it. So yeah, they start yelling or screaming, or in usually with somatic therapy, what we do is we resource people. So like, oh, what's your favorite things in life, or your favorite people, or your dog, or the waterfall that blew your mind, or whatever. We kind of build up this positive energy and get them to, what's it feel like when you think of your best friend? Oh, my heart gets all open and do. And then, okay, well, what happened? The one with your mom died. Oh God, I start to like, and okay, well, remember the hug from your friend, and you try to kind of like bring in, like, kind of go slowly into the trauma, like, and then sometimes they go in, okay, it's really uncomfortable, and then we pull out and we resource, and we talk about, so ideally you're kind of going in and getting that feel that, like, I can process a little bit, but when it gets overwhelming, I can resource. I have this sort of life ring. Occasionally with psychedelic, like, and that's in a regular session, that's how it goes. But when you add psychedelics, there's this possibility that especially if there's a lot of repression, and then I start working with the repression, and with the buffer, or undoing the shame freezes, I call them, and then I'm really careful to not give too much medicine too fast, and I'm not too, but it just depends on a person's sort of physiology, really, that sometimes a big release can happen and go on for the next 2 hours. Is like totally on the record. Before that was like 25 minutes. So that's, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of these sessions. So that's it's only happened once in my whole career that somebody got that dysregulated for that long.
And when you take a therapist dose, Julia's asking, can you build up tolerance to the medicine taking that lower dose?
Yeah, you can. So if you were taking it like that, because people ask about microdosing, because it's really good for pain. Actually, the 3-MMC, they were for menstrual cramps. It's amazing, like low dose, like 30 milligrams or 40. And people were trying to take it for like depression and stuff. But you build a tolerance. So after a couple of days you start at 80, then after a couple of days you need 90, and then 100, then 120, 150, 200. So it doesn't work that well for microdosing if you were like consistently, but if you did it it stays in your system for about 48 hours because it reuptakes itself. So even after a whole medicine day, the next day you can still kind of feel it in your system. It's just down to like 10% of what it was at the peak.
So how do you navigate that as a therapist then? Like if you're doing, 3-4 sessions a week, then how do you manage that?
Yeah, I only do 2 protocols a week. So the protocol, there's a pre-session, there's a medicine day, and then there's the integration session. And then I'll do another pre-session, medicine day, integration session. So I do take it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And on Thursday, I just take about 5% more, just to compensate for the stuff that's still in my system from 2 days ago or whatever.
Right. You mentioned muscle testing a couple of times. Can you briefly touch on that? Like how do you leverage that intuitive tool?
Yeah, so muscle testing is using your body as a biofeedback instrument. So there's all different, you can use any muscle as an indicator. When I teach muscle testing, I usually teach this one, my name is Sasha, and you push down and it's strong. And I mean, we could all do this together, right? You make a loop, and then, put your finger there and just say, the sky is blue, and then push, and you try and hold it closed as hard as you can, and then say, the sky is red. And if you're tuned up properly, you start getting, you can get yes and no answers. So 20 years ago, I read a book that said you could use muscle testing to connect with your spirit guides. And so for the last 20 years, I've been playing 20 questions with the spirit world. Is it this? Is it animal, vegetable, mineral? But eventually you get down, you get better at asking questions, and get down to some pretty fine or the answers.
Can you talk about the kind of shamanic aspect of this medicine work? Because frequency obviously is a compound, and there's a bit of a kind of therapist relationship there. But whenever you're opening, a session, or you're closing, and within that container, like what is the role of the shamanic kind of techniques or realms or like information that is present in the space, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, well, each practitioner is different on the level of shamanic plant or like technology that they want to bring into a session. Some people it's just a smudge, and other people, they work with plant spirits or animal spirits, so they'll have their owl wing or whatever. So I find with any session, you kind of want to gauge it on the person's receptivity to it. Some people love that whole shamanic world, the shamanic technologies, and other people think it's a bunch of woo-woo stuff. So I don't really make it that explicit if the person's not into it. I'm doing a lot of stuff in the with the soul retrievals, and sometimes it's happening, they're not aware of it, and I'm bringing in plant spirits and sort of channeling them and whatnot. But yeah, it just kind of depends on what you've learned over the years. And I used to do a lot of those drum journeys is a good way to get into shamanic practice, because you can do it without medicine, where you like dum 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 dum. You can put on a playlist of shamanic drumming, and it puts your brain into a theta state, and you can pop into the spirit world that way. Or sometimes plant medicines in particular, but also 3-MMC and to a small degree MDMA, can expand your perceptual bandwidth, so that you start perceiving the spirit world. I tend to see the spirit world as here now, directly overlaying this world. Only our perceptual antenna isn't tuned to the frequency of the spirit world. Kind of like a TV. If you're on channel 3, channel 4 is still there in the air, but invisible. You're just not perceiving it. So taking the medicine can turn you to channel 4, where now you're at 3 and 4. Now you're perceiving a broader bandwidth of reality. And the medicine can actually give you a taste of that for some people, not everybody, but a lot of people were like, wow, my intuition was like on steroids when I was in this medicine, and I could hear my spirit guides, and my inner teacher was telling me what to do. So that can be an amazing experience to know that it's possible. Sometimes then the medicine wears off, and then they lose it all again. But at least they know they have that capacity, and then you start finding other ways. And to me, again, your ability to perceive the wider reality comes from embodiment. too. This is the instrument. This is the cell phone to the spirit world. So the more in this, and the more you are inhabiting the spacesuit, the more chance you're going to connect with those intuitive and psychic abilities. So they're built into everybody. It's not like someone's special or whatever. As you do the work, it tends to come more and more online.
Beautiful. I will leave it open for another question if someone has another question. But otherwise, Sasha, what are you up to in the world these days? And you know, you have a training coming up in the fall. Would you like to share a bit more? Because Kate is also asking it. The location on your website. Can you share more information around the training and what's covered?
Sure. I just put out a new website about 2 weeks ago, and it's kind of in it's being changed. It's under construction, but it's up. So it's the basic info is kind of thrown into a pile there.
And you've held the training for, you know, a number of years now.
Yes, I think this one coming up is the eighth one. So I do it every spring and fall. If there's enough people that are interested. Marketing hasn't been one of my strong points. So the web page and all that, you know, it's trying to get it out there in the world. Mostly what I'm teaching, well, most of what I've talked about, I'm teaching in the training. The first thing we learn is navigating safe touch and boundary repair. On the webpage, it goes into what's taught there, but there's a sequence to it. You know, like this is the whole training is like a session, kind of, where you go through all the sort of checklist of things you would do in a session, and it's taught in 2 6-day parts. So we come in October for 6 days, and then come back in November for 6 days at a retreat center. And the one that's planned for October is going to be on the Sunshine Coast. In the training, we do 3 medicine days. So the first 6 days, there's 1 medicine day. And in the beginning of the training, I put you into triads, and you stay with your triad through the whole thing. So throughout the training, you'll be the participant once, and then in the co-therapy role twice. And with this stuff, I really find it's very experiential when I'm teaching. Of course, I give all the the neuroscience and the theory of what's happening, but then we practice with each other the whole time. From day one, pretty much, we're practicing the techniques. So it's, I never understood in university that, that it's like 95% academic theory and then 5% application and practice. And to me, it should be the other way around. You're being trained to sit with people. You should be sitting with people. And not talking about the theory of sitting with people.
And what's the expectation there for people? Like I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, most people are wanting to be therapists, but there's also people on their healing journey that wants to better understand their stuff, right? And so what's the expectation for a therapist coming out of the training? I'm assuming people would just join a training for 12 days and they start sitting with people. Like, what are the kind of requirements, or what do you suggest, like, are possibilities that are reasonable and safe for people as therapists? Like, what do you expect them to have before you can actually start doing sessions with people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And people ask me that a lot. Like, will I be certified to be a psychedelic therapist? And I always say no, because the course, I see it as an introduction. It's an introduction to being trauma informed. It's an introduction to trauma resolution, relational healing, and adding in some psychedelics into the mix. But for people that what it's ideal for actually is people that already have a therapeutic practice, that have been practicing for 5 or 10 years, and then they want to add and work into their existing practice. Then they might be ready after taking my course to start. And I always recommend that they start with friends and family first. Start with yourself first, actually, and then friends and family, before, and then practice for a year or two before you start working with paying clients. So it's a bit of a long path. And I've been talking to a dear friend about creating a more like a school, where it would be like a 4-year program. And then you would actually be certified at the end, or we might recommend more work or more practice, for like you'd have a practicum and make it much more legit, because it's a total Wild West out there, and such a spectrum of, oh yeah, I've done acid a few times, I could sit for you or whatever, and then someone has
It's
a
pretty
panic
rampant,
attack.
actually, honestly. Like, it's pretty rampant, the amount of people that are sitting for people that, maybe shouldn't be.
Yeah, it really, like, you should be a minimum of doing your own deep work for like 5 years, uh, and then start considering getting trained, and then practice just with your friend, and then so and then still doing your own work, and I would say 5 years minimum before you start serving paying clients or whatever.
Hmm. And then there's your masterclass on Nectara too, which is a great introduction for people to get trauma informed online. And you want to talk a bit more about that as well?
Yeah, that was basically a condensation of all the gold nuggets that I'd been collecting over the last 25 years. If it's what I find with learning the techniques, especially the tools that you want to apply all the time, is to really embody them to a place where you know when to apply them in a session. It takes a lot of repetition, even just to understand the theory of it, and then apply it. The more repetition, the better. So I for people that want to take my training, I always suggest do the masterclass first. If it feels like it's something that's grabbing you, then take the training. And I was offering you, if you buy the masterclass, then that comes off the tuition for the training, because it sort of rolls into it. So I'm really trying to incentivize people to take the masterclass, because not only is it setting you up to then learn the practical parts, the teachings in there can be applied to your life right now. Like, if you're a parent or you're a first responder, or, like, first responders aren't trauma informed, and they're working with trauma every day. It's whack. This information's been around for a while. It's not new, so it's shocking that paramedics and firemen and police people aren't. So even for anyone like that, or sitters or plant medicine people that are angeling or pouring medicine, probably one of the best things you can do is get trauma informed. So if someone has a freak out in your plant medicine ceremony, you know what to do, how to regulate them and all of that. So
Yeah.
it's really good for just becoming trauma informed, and then it's a stepping stone to then start learning more practical techniques.
Yeah. And the vision for you, I think we talked about this before, is having, like the school you mentioned, but also having trauma-informed people in hospitals and police stations and fire stations and in schools and parenting. And
Right.
my son is 6 now, and I really appreciated like learning about trauma so that I can reflect on myself and him as well, like as a way for me to learn and to guide him better. Can find it valuable. And Rich and Jillian, they want to share a little something. I'm going to
Sweet.
mute them. Yeah. Rich and Jillian are the owners of the Sentinel in Caslo, beautiful retreat center that just down the road from me, and we love them dearly.
Do you want to spotlight them, or?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know what that means, but hi, everybody. I just wanted to jump in and say something about Sasha's training. And so, Richard, at the Sentinel, we host a sort of an introductory training for people who want to be working in this field, which is wonderful. And it's actually somewhat similar to what Sasha was talking about with the triads, and everybody's working, doing practical experience all the time. And then Sasha, we took Sasha's trauma informed, and it just opened everything up. It just it built on the sort of basics that we got it, and I also want to say everybody has their own sort of style and their own way of working with it, and so there's only one Sasha Cuff, unfortunately. But we are bringing a lot of what we've learned, and even more today, to that. And so if anybody is interested, take his training. it really is a great tool, and you'll learn some wonderful things. You want to say?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's
Yeah.
lovely to see Sasha do his own work over the years,
Yeah.
and then from that incorporate everything, the new modalities that he has. And so in this work, it's not a thing about getting it, it's about the ongoingness of us all learning and working with the clients and having the clients actually teach us and the medicine teach us, and then implement more things. The training that and the people that we work with over the years, we're so much more informed by doing the work. So anybody that can sit with a trained therapist or a trained practitioner, do it. You know, sit there, do the time, be with it, and remember this: it's your presence. The medicine is one thing, and I don't want to get caught up in the pill, because the people's the medicine, you're the medicine, and it's this ongoing journey that everybody has to fulfill on their lives, really fulfill on their potential. And I just want to thank Sasha, because I love him dearly, but he's made a difference to so many people in the world, including myself. I very specifically shame in my life, shame. And so whether it be as a client or as a friend or as him as a teacher, I really honor him and his place in the world. And Pascal, thank you very much. I really appreciate your work as well. And thank you very much. I've got it.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. That was really sweet.
Cool. Well, I honor you as well, Sasha. Do you have any closing thoughts? Any parting wisdom or stories or anything you'd like to share first?
For some reason, what's popping into my head right now is on the website, I wrote a paper called The 8 Types of Shame, and the paper still needs some work, but to me, it's sort of the seminal, like if I could teach anything, it would be the understanding that the suppression mechanisms are physical. So you could talk about stuff all day long, and if you don't undo the suppression mechanisms, you're never going to get to, there's going to be stuff that's just going to be stuck in there forever. And the two main suppression mechanisms are holding patterns, which is in the fascia, which is kind of like, if you try to stop crying, you actually feel you're like, I'm going to hold it in, right? And a lot of us were taught to do that. So there's you go into the holding pattern and you use the buffer, and then the other suppression mechanism is what I call biological shame. And it always has this feeling of like numbing, blank, and cold, and there's some simple techniques to release those suppression mechanisms, and that's one of the main things that I'm teaching in the classes is simple techniques like rubbing, doing this, like, and then all of a sudden then the traumas can come out because it's not being suppressed by the parasympathetic shutdowns and holding patterns and freezes and play deads. It's a whole spectrum of parasympathetic, so it's not just about working with the trauma, also the relational layers block. So I don't know why I wanted to throw that out there, but
yeah, and in the masterclass,
if you're a therapist, working with shame is really important.
Yeah, and in the masterclass, you can see Sasha like ring me over with the orbital polisher and releasing my own shame freeze. That was pretty fun, and it works really effectively. You're right; it's a very simple, powerful technique that people can try at home tonight if they go to Canadian Tire.
Oh yeah, there's a good demo in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Shada just posted the links on 8 types of shame that Sasha wrote and 19 types of trauma. Those are free resources that we're making available. And if you have any other questions or anything of the kind, just email us at hello@nectara.co. And Sasha's website is linked somewhere in the chat along with the masterclass. And yeah, thank you for joining. This was hosted by Nectara. We're an ecosystem of support for people entering and leaving psychedelic experiences. Thank you all for joining. Hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Pascal, for hosting.
Yep. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.